Hey everyone, welcome back to WonderGod. Today we will see third part, what if Harry was chosen by death to save the world one last time. Here is short summary. After dying in the Triwizard Tournament, Harry is given one final chance by death itself, to rewrite destiny, stop Voldemort, and save the world, or be lost forever. But before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe to WonderGod and share it with your friends, because it really helps the channel grow. Now, let's begin the story. Friday, January 8, 1993. Sirius looked at Remus and the two youngsters. This should take about half an hour as I have to do some minor rituals to gain control of the house wards. He glanced at the elf. Do not order any food or drink from him. Do not sit on any of the furniture. It is probably cursed or trapped if anyone except a pureblood sits on them. Moony, just clean an area of rug and put a cushioning charm on it. And with those words, he disappeared up the main staircase. The three passed the time with some sluggish conversation. Although Harry did leave Lupin looking thoughtful when he said, Sirius should try a permanent sticking charm where the drapes join. It took Sirius the half hour he figured to finish his work and search. The three visitors were added to the house ward book, and they headed back to Potter Manor. Their Hermione told Lupin they were headed up to Harry's room so she could check his holiday homework. Once there, neither of them sat. Checking homework was the last thing the two would be doing. Hermione's opening cast chain consisted of laying the silvery pouch on his bed, followed by a raised eyebrow glare, with a foot tapping and arms crossed on her chest follow-up. Well, was spoken in her low growl. Was another of those things there. Pinned in a corner again, Harry knew lying was out. If she saw him trying to dissemble, she would probably become angrier with him. Yes, but I don't know where in the house. You may have noticed that I'm trying to hide these things from Lupin and Sirius. Lupin because he still might run off and tell Dumbledore. Sirius, because his mind isn't quite all back yet. One of these cursed things might hurt him. Am I to assume that those are the only reasons you won't tell the two men who probably are your biggest adult supporters what is going on? She volleyed back with her glare and crossed arms still evident. Can you imagine what they would think or do if I suddenly started spouting off that there was a super dark something in the house, but don't worry, I know how to take care of it. He returned. Harry had to resist the urge to bury his face in his hands. And just how do you think they will react to my 12-year-old self knowing all this really dark stuff? He said with air quotes at the end. You only know how they affect me. You don't know what these things can do to other people. Her look of surprise was quickly followed by a look of insight. He could see as she considered that she had felt how much the diary thing had pained his scar. And it was the fact that she knew it was his scar that was affected that slowed down her rush to pass sentence on his secretiveness. Suddenly a look of horror came over her face. You've seen that happen, she blurted. Gods be damned for having smart friends. He cursed in his mind. She stared at him for a moment before she opened her mouth to talk again when she suddenly closed it and fell into his leather reading chair. You said it was a diary. That means someone probably wrote in it. Diaries are where young people, usually girls, put their deepest thoughts. Their deepest hopes and fears. It would be a place where someone could find out your deepest fears. Your deepest desires, she pinked up a bit at the last. Her on the galleon analysis started Harry pacing. Her sitting down gave him the room. She started thinking out loud. You know, if it copied the writer's words to another diary, that could lead to all sorts of blackmail material. If it was a young girl, the person with the other diary would have almost total control over whoever wrote in the original. I've read about linked journals that are set up to copy in one what is written in the other. She developed a thoughtful look. No, that wouldn't work. Your scar makes it seem more evil than merely malicious. I've felt it. It wanted more. Harry almost tripped over his own feet as he spun to look at her when she said the last bit. She continued sorting her thoughts by talking to herself now. I felt it. It was trying to overwhelm your mind. It wanted to grab you. No, it wanted into you like it wanted to possess. Quote. Her face morphed back into wide-eyed horror. That's why you told me to try to stab it with the sword if it beat you. It wanted to possess your body. And you knew it. Her face turned to puzzlement as some part of her memory struck her. But if your other person had to write in it for him to be taken over, that would mean it took some time before trying for possession. Why was it so quick with you? She said the last glaring at Harry, demanding he tell her the answer. She knew he knew. Internally Harry sighed. He had known that once his dam cracked on his reservoir of information, his friend would jump on every little slip. At that point, he winced because he was still surprised at all the little slips made in the summer, and at Hogwarts, that she had pointed out to him weeks ago. I'm just guessing, mind you, but probably because it knows I mean to do it harm. I've captured it, and I'm going to kill it. What about the one you sensed at Sirius House? Let him kill it. He told me once that the library in there had books that would tell you how to kill anything, Harry replied dryly. He looked up to see her goggling at him. It took him a moment to understand. He roughed his hair, not looking at her as he said, I'm only 12/14, Hermione. Sirius will heal and become a responsible adult soon. I'll point them out to him, and he and Lupin can kill him. Or maybe tomorrow, I can find out if William Weasley can kill them. Ron's bragged that he's a cursebreaker with Gringotts. Says he's done all sorts of dangerous things. Harry, why do you say you want to kill these things? They're not alive. He opened his mouth to hotly reply when his brain kicked in. He closed his mouth and merely stared at her, refusing to answer. Saturday. Next morning, Harry, Hermione and Lupin arrived at the front steps of Gringotts. Harry entered and the other two went to collect some school supplies that she and Harry were short of. Hermione was a little short of time as she wanted to spend the rest of the day with her parents as the express was taking them back to Hogwarts tomorrow. Lupin was wondering what had happened. The two kids had exchanged about 6 words all morning. Stating his appointment with Cursebreaker Weasley to the goblin at the back wall preferred customer desk, Harry settled on a bench to wait. In less than 5 minutes a tall, lanky, freckled, redhead, wearing a cool-looking greenish-black dragonhide coat, some type of tooth dangling as an earring, and his hair gathered in a long ponytail, that Harry remembered from the tournament, came up to him. Lord Potter, I am William Weasley. Please call me Bill. All that came out as he was shaking Harry's hand. Harry grinned back. Except for when some busybody would cause a fuss, please call me Harry. It was a short 2-minute walk to a room that was where the meeting would take place. There were 4 stone chairs, a black stone round table and a small table off to the side with human drinks and snacks. Harry was too nervous to take more than a mug of tea. Bill had been working for goblins for only a short time, but had picked up on their do not waste time ethos. He got right down to business with, what do you need from me, Lo? Harry. Harry reached into his robe and hauled out a parchment scroll. First, I need you to sign this contract. As he read, Bill noted 2 unusual things. One was the contract was written on Gringotts contract parchment. That was unusual in that the special parchment was only used by the bank and by preferred and smart customers of the bank. The goblin charmed parchment guaranteed no hidden or invisible clauses to allow fraud. 1. Second, except for the penalties for revealing the work he would be doing were harsher than usual, there was a specific clause that if working for Lord Harold Potter found any objects that were of a danger to Gringotts, he was allowed to warn the bank management. After signing, the contract flashed away to be recorded with a certified copy left for the two. As a mildly bemused Bill Weasley recovered from the flash, he wondered why, and then how the young lord, not even as old as his brother Ron, knew all these forms that even a rich pureblood would probably be ignorant of at this age. Cursebreaker Weasley, I need you to examine me. Specifically, the scar on my forehead. Bill's eyes immediately whipped up to the raw-looking mark. It was definitely unusual in that intellectually he knew it was about 11 years old, yet it looked fresh, no more than 4 days old. Things had just gotten formal again. This must be serious, Bill thought. He stood up over Harry, who tilted his head back to give the man a better look. Bill started casting. A veritable rainbow of colored lights and what Harry thought might be arithmancy calculations danced in the air over his forehead. In little over a minute, a now stone-faced Cursebreaker excused himself to get some research books from his office. He returned in less than 10 minutes with 4 books and 3 scrolls. He then spent 15 minutes casting more spells over and around Harry's scar, and looking through his references. He finally leaned back, and with a sigh spoke, Lord Potter, I am virtually certain I know what is wrong with your scar. The problem is I have only dealt with what I think your scar is in objects from ancient Egypt. And at the same time, my scans have come back without the readings I seen from these objects before. He dragged a hand down his face. I want to get your permission to allow a goblin healer to examine you. I will vouch for the integrity and silence of the Grokshudara. I think I know what I'm doing, but I would recommend an experienced second opinion. Harry just stared at the oldest Weasley son for a moment. Cursebreaker Weasley, one of the greatest problems I have had since I rejoined the magical world a year and a half ago was that no one tells me anything about what I really need to know. Albus Dumbledore in particular. He paused for emphasis, so, I find myself getting upset when people keep secrets from me and say it's for my own good. Harry took a couple of deep breaths. What is the problem? Weasley looked distinctly unhappy. Lord Potter, if I am correct, it is bad news. If I am incorrect, that is good news. He stared intently at Harry. I want to get a second opinion, my lord. This is one of those times I would prefer to find out I am wrong in my analysis. To hell with the embarrassment. Harry stared back. He was fairly sure the Cursebreaker thought he had found a Horcrux. Harry knew what he had found was a soul fragment that was accidentally made, and was weaker, and more poorly protected than a Horcrux. Problem was, by consulting the goblin, it meant another person, or goblin in this case, would be in on the great secret of what Tom had done. Since it might get me another voice working for me when I try to get the goblins to destroy the Hufflepuff cup in a vault deeper than the Potter main vault, I should have someone who believes me in Gringotts. All right, said Harry, we'll try it your way. Bill left and 20 minutes later returned with an old wizened goblin who was mostly concealed by a hooded cloak. The pair approached Harry while carrying on a conversation in what Harry assumed was goblin language. Harry was asked for, and gave his permission for the goblin to examine him. And with a goblin hand pass the table became what looked like a hospital bed straight from Hogwarts. Another few gestures and Harry was stretched out on his back. The goblin healer waved his hands over Harry's head. He stopped chanting abruptly and drove his hand into a waist pouch, which came out with an almost palm-sized pulsing pink stone. The stone was jammed against his scar and held there. The chanting was started again with all the passes over his scar by the free hand. The pain started behind the scar. It was bad, and rapidly getting worse when Harry suddenly knocked the stone away and hurriedly sat up. The hooded goblin was growling angrily at Harry and then turned his wrath onto the Cursebreaker. A panting Harry raised a hand and abruptly said, I know what is in my forehead. However, it also acts as a sensor for when I am around the other parts of the Dark One's soul. It makes me feel where they are. That stopped the goblin's diatribe instantly. The hood was thrown back as the ancient goblin thrust his face within inches of Harry's. Then why are you here, foolish youngling? Do you want the glory of dispatching these foul things? He ranted in a heavy, but understandable, accent. While the goblin healer had all of Harry's attention, he did not see the knife suddenly appear in his hand. Bill did, and was terrified. If that thing behind Harry's scar was a Horcrux, and Harry had to die for the evil soul part to die, the bank's leadership would approve if the healer goblin killed Harry right now. No, respected healer. We both know who I am carrying a piece of. And it has so far reacted when I get close to other parts of his torn soul. I want them removed from the earth. But, how do I find them? And then how do we get rid of them? Because I cannot. Another problem is the pain from my scar almost overwhelms me when I am near another piece of his soul. The knife did not waver a jot. Foolish human. Why should I believe you? Harry had thought of an answer for that. I have had this scar since I was a baby. A baby who had no defense against any possession of me that piece might have tried. Everybody calls me the boy who lived. I call myself the boy whose mother somehow protected him. My mother is the one who did something that hurt Voldemort. Bill cringed at the name, but he did not die, and we three know why. It was at that point, Harry happened to look down and saw the wickedest knife ever almost touching his stomach. The confident air he had been projecting almost died a quick death as his balls tried to migrate up to his chest. Neither the goblin's knife nor his eyes had wavered from Harry. Your little story has a fatal flaw in it, human youngling, he bit off like a rock being crushed into pebbles. How would you know of other possible abominations the Cursed One has made? Harry wanted to say anything, babble any words that would get that goblin-held knife away from his guts. The thought flitted through his head. That this was the worst he'd been scared since the dragon in the first task last year. That led his thoughts down a long familiar path. Voldemort in the back of Quirrell's head, the Acromantulas, the basilisk slithering out of its nest. The swarm of Dementors wanting to K out his inserious souls, Lupin killing him and Hermione by fang and claw. And the dragon, the hostages in the lake, and the end with Cedric's death, Voldy's return, and a traitor's Avada Kedavra to his face. Bill Weasley watched as a transformation came over the small pre-teen in front of him. He suddenly seemed a couple of inches taller, and suddenly Bill felt as though he was in the presence of someone much older and wiser. "Tell me, Cursebreaker Weasley, what is the penalty for having a forbidden artifact more powerful than my scar in a Gringotts vault?" The question took the redhead by surprise. It took a moment for him to say, "The fine for having done so is a minimum of half of the personal vault, up to complete confiscation of the offending family's vaults." A smirking grin appeared on Harry's face. "Would Tongueripper become a happy goblin if I informed you of such an occurrence in an old deep vault?" "He would probably hurt himself trying not to celebrate, Lord Potter." "You would be rewarded with between a quarter and half of the total fine," answered a shocked William Weasley. Suddenly his eye became fearful. "Lord Potter," Weasley ejaculated. "A false accusation will find the accuser fined just as severely. Have faith, Cursebreaker Weasley. Let's go see him and tell him the news. Oh, and bring your friend along, as one of these days I am going to need him to remove this thing from my forehead." With the last words, Harry, ignoring the knife, turned for the door and took a few steps before turning back. "Come on. I have people waiting for me to finish here, and time is money." Harry may have looked confident, but he had to wait for the other two to catch up, as he had no idea where he was or where Tongueripper's office was from here. The goblin healer did the knocking on Harry's account manager's door. Without awaiting a reply, he barged in and started yelling in Goblin at Tongueripper. Harry started to follow up to Tongueripper's desk when Bill placed a hand on his shoulder and held him back. He knew Harry did not understand that the situation was ripe for instant goblin violence, and he wanted neither of them near the angry goblins. The growling and snapping, while seeming to go on forever between the two, was suddenly shut off as Tongueripper slammed his hands on his desktop and barked at Harry. "Young Lord Potter, what evidence do you have that Gringotts is harboring a dark cursed artifact in our vaults?" Harry cautiously stepped up in front of the desk and answered, "What do you know about the death of Quirinus Quirrell last year? He was the defense against the dark arts professor." Everyone looked at each other, but no one answered. Harry sighed and said, "This will take some time. Tongueripper, my facilitator, and my friend Hermione Granger are probably waiting for me to finish my business here. We will be a while. Can you have someone tell them I will be late?" Within 2 minutes a young goblin messenger was on his way to the lobby, and Harry started with his tale. Last year, Headmaster Dumbledore hid the Philosopher's Stone in Hogwarts. He ignored the gasp of shock from Weasley. He used it as bait for Voldemort to lure him to the school where he could capture the spirit that he existed as at the time. It took myself and 2 others almost the whole school year to find out about the stone's presence, and that someone wanted to steal it. One night we discovered a professor was going to steal the stone. So, we determined to save it, and 3 of us ended up running a gauntlet of, well, tests meant to kill, incapacitate, or at least slow down anyone searching for the stone. Harry paused for a moment to regroup. In the last room of the test, I found the Dada professor, Quirinus Quirrell, searching the room for the stone. At the time, my scar was hurting so badly I was having trouble thinking clearly. When Quirrell took off his turban, I almost passed out from the sight and the almost overwhelming pain that came from seeing what I soon learned was the face of Voldemort attached to the back of Quirrell's skull. The goblins stiffened at the last. Bill almost collapsed. Harry took a deep shuddering breath at the memory. That was when I understood that the intermittent pain I had been having for months while in defense class had been from being near a spirit or wraith of Voldemort. Or what I'm beginning to think was part of one anyway. Harry wrinkled his nose in frustration. But how can that be? Everyone tells me Voldemort is dead. Anyway, my mother's sacrificial protection from the first time he tried to kill me as a baby still worked, and when Quirrell tried to strangle me, it disintegrated his flesh and drove Voldemort's wraith from Quirrell's body. Dumbledore told me that when Voldemort's spirit left Quirrell, it caused his immediate death. Harry looked down at his shoes, then looked up at each of the other 3. The reason I told you this story was for you to understand that I don't know why my scar hurts when I'm near what I can only describe as a part of Voldemort, but it does. And one of the times it hurt was when I went down to the Potter main vault. I stopped to look down at the white dragon below. That started my scar throbbing. Then yesterday, I was near another something that set off my scar again. Harry straightened his shoulders. What I am afraid of is that my scar has a bit of Voldemort in it. And it seems to interact with other bits he's left around as though they want to rejoin together. A pause. It seems from what I felt, he left one here, deep in your caverns. Harry couldn't have surprised the three Gringotts employees any more than if he had tried riding that security dragon he'd seen out of the bank. Tongueripper mashed the rune-covered button on his desktop, and after a brief acknowledgement, had talked quickly, yet for some reason he sounded like he was talking to a superior. In less than 3 minutes, 4 heavily armored goblin guards and a large, truly mean-looking scarred goblin entered Tongueripper's office without knocking. The 2 goblins and Bill immediately took a knee and bowed their heads. Harry, having no idea what he should be doing, decided upon a waist-deep bow. While the large, scarred goblin barked words that seemed to literally blast the bank employees, Harry took note that no one looked up into his face. He also decided due to the elaborate, heavily gold-chased black armor this goblin was obviously much senior to the others. The bodyguards also indicated this was obviously a goblin leader of some type. After a minute or so of reaming out the Gringotts employees, the huge goblin turned to Harry. Looking down at him, the goblin growled, "Young lordling, I want you to explain to me exactly why you believe we have a vicious dark artifact in our bank. Besides the one you brought in with you." Harry again explained the story of his first-year exposure to Quillermort. He emphasized the headaches he got from being in the classroom with what he now knew was a possessed professor. He especially emphasized that on seeing the face on the back of Quirrell's head, the pain that incapacitated him, and the wraith that escaped from the professor's body later. He followed with the story of his scar ache while peering down at the dragon during his family vault visit. Harry was only interrupted a couple of times by the goblin leader shooting rapid-fire questions Harry couldn't understand at Bill, the goblin healer, and Tongueripper. The replies were short and shaky. The imposing goblin seemed to finish. He stood thinking for a minute before turning to Harry. "Very well, young lordling. We will investigate the lower-level vaults. Since you are not accusing any one vault owner of bringing such a disgusting abomination into our bank, if you are wrong, we will merely charge your vaults for the time of our investigators. We will not charge the usual penalties for false accusations. Understand?" Harry nodded in acceptance. The important-looking goblin stared at Harry's forehead for a long moment. "You do realize I should not allow you to leave this office without removing the evil you are carrying. The abomination behind your scar should be removed from existence immediately. If possible." The room became even more silent. "As that could involve leaving you very dead, we will postpone that reckoning for another day. Since you are still unpossessed after 11 years of carrying it, your healer thinks it is safe to allow you to keep it a while longer." The towering, fearsome goblin suddenly loomed over Harry. "However, if we hear any whisper that the Dark One has returned, we will have it removed. Along with as much of your head as needed to be positive it is gone." With one final grunt, the impressive goblin started to turn away. Harry was now thoroughly scared. That had been a threat. A threat of a death sentence for him if the Dark Wanker reappeared. And one of Harry's greater worries has been that he remembered one of upper management's dictums that after all the bedamned Horcruxes were killed, Voldemort had to be revived and have a body before Harry could kill him. Oh, yeah, and make sure he had the fragment removed from his forehead or it would k out his magical and life force while oldie Voldy was dying and kill him. Thinking of Horcruxes, suddenly he had an inspiration. "Sir, if I may, who do I talk to about possibly having a goblin craftsman create some silver-lined, lead magic blocking boxes to keep any other, rare items I might find from harming anyone before they can be destroyed?" The important-looking goblin leveled a positively ferocious glare at Harry. The young wizard was suddenly afraid he had asked for too much from the goblin. Just as Harry's legs were about to turn into jelly, the large goblin grunted something in goblin language at Tongueripper and strode out the door. The first thing that occurred after the door closed was everyone took a surreptitious breath of relief. After which the other three turned and stared, or glared, at Harry. Tongueripper grunted in goblin at Bill, who turned to Harry and with a sickly smile said, "Harry, that was the director of Gringotts Bank in Britannia that you just casually asked to recommend to you a craftsman to build a simple box." A puzzled Harry was trying to remember some conversations his Uncle Vernon had about his work with Aunt Petunia. Director? Is that like president of the bank? If it were possible, Bill looked even paler and sicker. More like the king of the Goblin Nation in Britannia. Except it's more like an older version of a king. He is the absolute ruler. His word is law, and there is no parliament to check his power. Harry pondered for a few seconds. So if I had really upset him with my box question, I could have literally lost my head. All three of the beings facing him nodded their attached heads in unison. The others all heard Harry's muttered, "Hogwarts has got to start a wizard's customs class." I could have become a whole head shorter through pure ignorance. At that moment, something went ping on Tongueripper's desk, and a piece of parchment appeared. The account manager snatched the parchment off his desk and rapidly scanned it. Harry didn't know it, but the following series of grunts was goblin laughter. Director Ragnarok must have been impressed by young Lord Potter, he thought. I have a crafting goblin available to make your boxes, Lord Potter. Can you give me a list of sizes you need if they are not all the same? Harry thought hard. The ring, 2 inches by 2 inches by 2 inches would be plenty to fit into. The diadem, 7 by 7 by 5 should work. For the diary, 8 by 6 by 2 would be enough. The locket would fit into a 4 by 4 by 2 inch box. I don't know the size of Hufflepuff's cup, so maybe 5 by 5 by 9 tall just to be safe. Nope, don't need box for the cup. I'd bet part of my vault Gringotts will destroy it. And if they can take care of the cup, maybe they can find and remove Voldemort from the other objects. Harry wrote the box's inside dimensions on a piece of parchment and passed it to Tongueripper. Thinking of which, account manager Tongueripper, I will have my house elf bring to you almost 5 pounds of gold bars and about 60 pounds of silver bars along with some English Muggle gold coins. I want the items totaled and added to my vault. Oh, and a bar of platinum. I assume Gringotts can always find a use for gold, he said with a hint of snark. I expect you to bargain with the box crafting goblin. See if we can sell him the silver for my boxes. After all, a sickle saved is another sickle for my vaults. Tongueripper's stone face looked unimpressed. Inside he was intrigued. Silver for sickle coins took so much of the available supply that there was a constant shortage of the metal for other needs. Sunday, January 9, 1993. It was a busy day around the Harry Potter world. Anyone who worked with account manager Tongueripper would have wondered what was wrong with the goblin. Almost having his main client nearly gutted by a goblin healer, then almost shortened by a head, had the old account manager wondering how he had offended Ulog to have his luck turn so bad. Especially since Lord Potter had managed to return enough Potter money from the non-magical humans to his control that he could see his goal of regaining his senior account manager status. Then his undisciplined thoughts would return to the total galleons Harry had been able to transfer from the Muggle world to Gringotts. He had carefully read the reports from the Muggle investment firm that had held the humans' money. The neat precise printing, especially the way columns of numbers lined up on the paper, fascinated him. He had originally only skimmed the reports to find out the total now added to the Potter vaults. The young lord had done better than his estimate to his account manager. The goblin was practically bouncing in his desk chair as the totals he now controlled were closing in on his senior account status goal. And this was after the monies taken by the Muggle government in taxes, and the minimal transfer fee the young goblins who worked the corner of the bank that dealt with Muggle banking had taken for making the transfer happen. It was with a grin not seen for 13 years, he started digging into the details of how the Muggles had taxed Lord Potter's inheritance. He was going to have to pay attention to those young, working with the Muggle World Juniors. Since they had brought him profit, he had a growing desire to find out how they operated between both worlds. He was deep in his work when the deep cavern alarms blasted through the back offices of the bank. Jeremy Layton was not having a good morning. An owl had arrived from his agent at the Muggle address that had been used to give Potter and Lupin credibility in the real world. The man said he and a couple of others had observed strangers checking out the house and subtly questioning others in the area. Sirius and Remus were back at Potter Manor after seeing Harry onto the Hogwarts Express. Sirius had been telling Remus it appeared as though someone was pressuring the staff at St. Mungo's to restrict his movements to see his godson. He was going to contact his cousin Andromeda Tonks since the hospital wanted to suddenly become all legalistic about his observation and treatment. He wanted his own legalistic solicitor to fight back. Zelkindis had just shared a very private, very quiet revelation with Annika about the Harry Potter case. He told her his didn't really believe it himself comment about Harry when they sent him back on his mission about the three fates acting a bit oddly in the Potter fate weave was looking possibly clairvoyant. Harry had made a point of getting to the Hogwarts Express as early as possible. He wanted his pick of a compartment. He was hoping for some privacy as he was positive Hermione was going to self-combust if she didn't get to question him soon. Some wand work, and a low-power notice me not charm was placed on the door after he pulled the curtains closed. He figured Hermione's determination to find him would override the weak spell. There was a good chance Luna, Neville and Ginny would also find him if their intent was strong enough. He had half an hour to himself he reckoned, and dragged out a notepad and a biro to work on a list. First, pay Lupin a bonus. After he had a couple of doors slammed in his face, he had suggested having a Gringotts goblin and a big brute acquaintance of mine to conduct any follow-up visits of any dark families that owed the Potters money. He had reported that threats were not needed after the first such visit. Second, he had a new supply of potions and elixirs from Healer Tonks. His problem was how to keep Grumblemore and his gullible house elves from contaminating his supplies. Could he hide them in the room of requirement? After all the alarms from his ring before Yule, and now that the fallout from the Sirius Black errors were lessening, Harry thought the manipulative old fool would be able to focus more attention on his Potter problem. Harry had spent a chunk of his holiday free time thinking of methods Mumblesnore could use to spy on him, potion him, or bespell him. As soon as possible he would find time to talk to Elf Gurna, who seemed to have more rank in the castle than most elves. He wanted to find out if some elf could be persuaded to alert him or sabotage any attempts by the old man to potion him. His musings were cut off as a brunette, bushy-haired hugger Missile yanked open the door and flew across the compartment and then attempted to squeeze all the air out of his lungs. The attempt was succeeding, and he was about to make a desperate move to get air when his best friend's grip lessened, and she popped backwards to stare into his eyes. "Missed you," she said brightly. "You just missed the studying and the chances to do magic for a few days," he replied in a faux posh, high-class accent. She huffed and shrugged out of her dragonhide backpack and sat down across from him. "Anything new you want to tell me?" she said with a smirk. "I've got him alone for at least 10 minutes, she thought. She had played this situation repeatedly in her mind the last several days. And frustratingly, she still had not decided how to get her answers. Maybe try the "you owe me" approach. Harry just looked back at her as he nerved himself up to tell her some secrets and some other things he had not told her about. And since he was not 100% sure she was his soul mate, he was still leery of telling her everything. Since they were further secrets kept from her, he expected some unhappiness with him from her. "Well, are you wearing the 2 necklaces I've given you?" Keeping her eyes locked on Harry's, she pulled the collar of her jumper aside and showed him both chains. Harry took a moment to bitterly remember when Sirius told them the amulet he had searched for was another black family trap that would probably kill a non-pureblood. Good. Well, you should always wear those necklaces even at night. Always make sure to wear them if you even think you might meet the headmaster or Snape. The Professor Snape from her was merely an automatic reflex. Together they should keep your mind protected from either of them reading your mind unless they do a full-out, blatant, wanted legilimency spell assault on you. When she didn't say anything, and just sat there staring, Harry nervously kept stumbling on. Also, they're both enchanted to block almost all minor hexes and jinxes. A strong curse will still hurt you though, but a lot less than if you were defenseless. She kept staring at him in shock, not saying anything as she processed what he was telling her. Even more unnerved, Harry babbled on. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a silver-looking ring with several jewel-type chips in it. "Oh, and I want you to wear this ring. I had the goblins get from my family vault. It should act a lot like my lord's ring about warning you about potions or poisons in your drink. You'll have to make a habit of drinking with your left hand, but it should work like you saw mine work before Yule. And while I'm thinking about it, do not eat anything you think might be a present from me. Remember all the potion attempts on me just before Christmas?" He got a nod from her. "Because you're my friend, they cursed and potioned you once. I'm afraid they will try again." Harry grabbed her left hand and slid the rather plain-looking silver ring onto her little finger. She could not stop herself. She held her hand up and stared at the ring, still silent. Harry wondered why she was staring so intently at the ring on her finger. Must be some girl thing, he thought. 2. Harry was starting to sweat buckets. She wasn't saying anything. She merely switched her stare from him to stare at her hand. Some shred of hard-won maturity enabled him to finally clamp his mouth shut. While Harry was dying from nerves about how badly this reveal was going, Hermione was in her own little mind-world memory. During her own Yule Christmas shopping in Diagon Alley, she had stopped at a small jewelry store. There she was greeted by an old woman with a friendly, motherly-looking face. She asked the woman if they had any male jewelry that she could get for her friend that could give him some sort of protection from spells she had read about. A bracelet or Mont's necklace. With initials on it. At that point, she had reached up and pulled into view her birthday present from Harry, the HJG initials clearly visible within the thin circle of the pendant. Having asked Hermione to remove the necklace, the woman had taken the necklace towards the back of the shop. She returned less than 5 minutes later looking confused. "My dear, my husband says if you want the same types and levels of protection that are on this rather innocuous pendant it would cost over 120 galleons. 4,200 pounds. Seeing the shock and confusion that flooded Hermione's face, the old woman gave her a small, sympathetic smile. "You didn't know. Well, whoever gave you this must love you very much. They have poured some serious coin into protecting you." Her mind was processing through her memory. If the small and ordinary necklace was so ensorcelled, what was her Christmas present bespelled with? "It has 3 rather large gems, and gems are supposed to hold more magical power versus even precious metals like gold," she thought. But how could she get it checked now? Suddenly, a thought popped into her head. "Do you mean I'm now protected against having my mind read by Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape? So now you can tell me what is going on without being worried that I'll accidentally give your secrets away," she said. Harry had considered the problem when he had the necklaces enchanted. Rather overkill instead of not enough protection. "Yes, also remember you also have your reflective spot glasses and rudimentary occlumency." Hermione huffed and jammed herself back in her seat. She was torn between berating him for not having told her she had some protection since her birthday and just how deep some of his secrets ran after seeing and feeling what she now thought of as the evil diary. "You sound as though you expect trouble when we get back to school." "Why?" Harry ruffled his hair. "My Lord Potter accession, the Pettigrew reveal, and Sirius being publicly found innocent, left Lumberdork scrambling to save his sacrosanct reputation and therefore his very influential positions in our world." She let the mangling of the headmaster's name be unmentioned. Harry noted it with a small internal cheer. He leaned forward earnestly. What happened is that people who had blindly followed him started questioning his skills, his reputation, and his judgment. For the first time in decades, he has been scrambling to explain his actions to his allies instead of having them accepted unchallenged. Harry was using his body language to add to his earnestness. Some of those allies have been talking among themselves why, despite Wumbledore's supposed best efforts, there has been no progress on expansion of rights for Muggleborn. In fact, they are now paying attention to the fact that the Light has been losing ground for 2 decades in their goal of increasing Muggleborn rights. The record for non-human magicals is even worse. Harry slowly shook his head. "My sources are telling me that Dumbledore has shored up his political support enough that he is no longer scrambling to explain his actions and is meeting with people for political talk rather than cover over the revelations about himself." Harry sat back, closed his eyes, and sighed. He just has too much unthinking credibility in Britannia. 3 heavy body blows to his reputation in 2 months and a month later the sun is shining out of his ass again. Hermione managed to keep her shock from becoming verbal. She had become somewhat reconciled to Harry's animosity to Professor Dumbledore, but this was way beyond anything they had talked about over holiday. She had just opened her mouth to ask him about the artifact hidden in his manor when the compartment door opened and Neville stuck his head in and asked if he could join them. Hermione froze. Her brain went, and thoughts of blasting their nervous housemate back into the passageway flitted through her mind. Harry started to feel relief that she would have to stop questioning him. Then his brain kicked in. He realized that this latest interruption was going to only increase his best friend's frustration levels, and he would pay for that frustration later. There really was no escape while at school and she knew they had a secure, secret place to talk in. Perhaps a good nap would give him the energy to stay awake after the welcoming feast. His hopes for a nap vanished as, though hidden under his invisibility cloak, he lost count as girls, mostly second years, came to the compartment to thank Hermione for her Christmas present. It wasn't until Parvati and Lavender opened the door and started squealing at Hermione about how much they just loved their presents. At that point Parvati rummaged in her purse and pulled out a brilliantly pink and green-colored, glittery, fluffy feathered pen. Or quill. Harry wasn't sure which it was. However, he recognized it. Hermione had bought a large package of them at the Office One store back in August and did not tell him why. He had seen her using one occasionally but thought little about it. When there was a break later, he asked her about the constant flow of her present recipients. She pinked up a bit but quietly told him how she had trolled the distinctive, and yes, I know they're girly, but unique to the Wizarding World pens. I did it for 2 reasons, Harry. The girls who got them know they're Muggle items, but no one else has them. Sort of a status thing. They are just girly fun, especially with color-changing ink. Second, because of them, I met a lot of girls in the other houses. I'm following your example. One cannot have too many friends. Much later that night, the pair, under Harry's invisibility cloak, made their way in silence to the come-and-go room. It was not only their need for secrecy that had them quiet, but Dumbledore's announcement that there had been a hold-up in procuring the mature mandrake roots needed to unpetrify the affected students had left the Gryffindor common room depressed. Harry set up what had become their standard meeting study room with several tables, chairs and a large, squashy, dark leather couch in front of the fireplace. He sat down, swiveling sideways to be able to see and talk to Hermione easily. She had other ideas. She plopped herself down sideways in his lap and with a wriggle, buried her head in his neck. That'll stop him from jumping up and driving me spare with his nervous pacing, she thought. She stayed in that position, silent, feeling the rise and fall of Harry's nervous heart rate. Her mind drifted. This is the way it should be. Harry and I cuddled up, warm in front of the fire. No trolls, no Quirrellmort memories, no petrified students in the infirmary. Why do I have the feeling that this fragile piece is about to be broken? That thought yanked Hermione back into the present. What am I thinking? It's time for my Harry to come clean. It's time to find out just what is going on. After a few moments, Hermione spoke, "You might as well start at the beginning, Harry. It'll give us points to restart from as I have the feeling this is going to take more than one night." She had counted to 10 before Harry started speaking. In the beginning there was darkness and no form. Then there was light that gave form. And it was. Harry stopped because she had just hauled off and punched his shoulder. Hard. Harold James Potter, enough. You have no right to treat me in such a cavalier fashion. I want to help you. And from what I've seen in the last few weeks, you desperately need help. I don't deserve this. I'd call it disrespect, but that isn't quite right. You are trying to do something all by yourself, when it is very apparent that you need help. Of some type. You've got me convinced that telling me earlier might have given Professor Snape or Professor Dumbledore information from reading my mind, but you tell me now it's protected. You also have given me reasonable explanations why you have not let Sirius or Lupin in on your secrets. That leaves only me as a confidant. You're driving yourself crazy trying to do it all by yourself. It's time, Harold. She shifted around and leaned back a little, looking Harry directly in the eye. Remember, I've seen, and felt, that nasty little problem you have hidden behind your basement wall. Her voice suddenly softened. Besides, you promised me, Harry. That did it. Even as a 14-year-old, Harry found he had no defense against a full-fledged, disappointed, but not berating him, Hermione Granger. Figuratively wrapping a cloak-like armor around himself, he started. First time around, between first and second year, I was feeling very lonely. I was getting no mail from you or from Ron. My relatives were getting nastier by the day. Then I had a visit from a very strange house elf. Did all this happen again? Hermione asked diffidently into his chest. She had settled back to bury herself into his neck. Harry jumped a bit in shock before his brain kicked in again. She knew he was 2 years older. It was a short jump from there to assuming he was reliving those 2 years again. Those extra 2 years had drastically improved his schoolwork and his spellwork. And she knew it. Yes, but the other time, the elf Dobby had gotten me in trouble, which led to my uncle going completely insane. They put me on starvation rations, locked Hedwig in her cage, and put burglar bars on my window. Hedwig and I nearly starved to death before Fred, George and Ron rescued me with Mr. Weasley's flying car. Harry could feel the tremors running through his friend's body as she seemed to have to physically force herself from asking a bunch of questions. He continued, glossing over several points. This time, I befriended him, got him to give me your letters he had intercepted, and without me realizing what I was doing, he had my stuff packed up, Hedwig set free, and he then elf-popped me to the steps of Gringotts Bank. I spent a week staying at the Leaky Cauldron, learned about my inheritances from the goblins, and discovered I owned the manor, and managed to save Ypres and Pima from death by lack of Potter magic. You even helped with the last, you may recall, he finished with one hand reaching up to stroke her non-buried and hairy cheek. Last time, I spent weeks at the Weasleys and had a great time. Since he was the one to persuade his brothers to rescue me, and literally saved Hedwig's life, Ron cemented his position as my best mate. He paused before continuing. I remember this was quite an exciting year. Ominous slogans painted on the wall. Half a dozen petrified students, yes, I know Hermione. Ron and I almost being eaten by giant lorry-sized spiders, and then we had to go rescue a girl from the Chamber of Secrets who was possessed by a spirit wraith of Voldemort. How nobody in the school died was a miracle. The fact that none of us three died was a miracle. I'll just not mention the bit where the basilisk killed me, he thought. 3. She's going to go crazy if I have to kill that big arsed snake anyway. He realized that Hermione was clutching at him hard enough to affect his ability to breathe. Hermione, he gasped. I'm here and just fine. The evil diary that possessed her has been. The constrictor tentacles had loosened. She had popped up again. Diary. Diary. You mean that evil feeling book at your house can possess people? Harry was about to lie to her when he realized that she had probably felt the evil taint from the diary when she had to help him recontain it at Yule. And besides, lying to Hermione was just wrong. He would know he had, and he just knew she would know he had. Yes, it can. That's why I had you and Ypres there for backup. They both went silent for a moment. So, Hermione said quietly, what caused the petrification of those students in the dungeons? I don't know, Harry answered shortly. That caused Hermione to rear back again to look him in the eye. He answered her obvious question immediately. It's not the same creature. Last time the diary possessed a young girl to wake up the creature in the Chamber of Secrets, paint the walls, and let it roam the school. Everyone they met was luckily only petrified instead of being killed. With obvious puzzlement in her voice she questioned, well then, this time who wrote the message on the wall? Harry flinched. Hermione felt it and slotted everything together. You did it. You painted the wall. But, why? What could you gain by painting a blood supremacy slogan on a wall? It's part of my plan, he replied with a ruffling of his hand through his hair. And your plan is for, what to happen? She said arching an eyebrow at him. Harry looked away from her eyes that were pinning him like a copper examining a suspect. It's how I'm trying to get Dobby free of his master. You saw how he looked. In rags, beaten, scarred and starved. Just like me. And like me getting free of Dumbledore, he needs help getting free of the Malfoys. And I'm his help. Harry suddenly had trouble breathing again. He knew it was Hermione hugging him, but thoughts of the giant squid having appeared shot through his mind. Her voice started again. How do you know the chamber is unopened? Unless. She was back to glaring at him. You've been into it, haven't you? You've checked it out. That's why you're positive it's not Slytherin's monster petrifying students this time. So, are you going to tell me what it is not? Harry found all he could do was stare at her. She huffed. Very well, it's research time. Monday morning. When Harry and Hermione returned last night to the Gryffindor common room just before curfew, almost everyone was still awake, yet the room did not have the lively energy of youngsters seeing friends again after 3-week separation. It was a depressed, listless feeling that permeated the room. No one seemed to want to be in the room, but no one had the energy for the effort required to actually go to bed. For some reason, Dumbledore's announcement of the Mandrake delay had affected the students greatly. Even Fred and George looked worn. They still were not talking about what had happened to Ron. And they were getting downright shirty with those who kept bugging them about what had happened to their brother. Asking the dour-looking Percy looked to be a way to get hexed. Lavender and Parvati had accosted Ginny, attempting to bully answers from the first-year redhead. The youngest Weasley whipped out her wand, and the older second-years were suddenly crying and running away from the eruption from their noses caused by her soon-to-be infamous Bat Bogey Hex. Luna helped the now-crying redhead up to their first-year dorm. Harry tried not to grin too broadly at their problem the two notorious gossip mongers had brought upon themselves. Harry was still surprised that neither Neville nor Luna had revealed their excursion to the dungeons on Halloween. The questioning from their housemates would have been tough. Monday morning, Harry swept his eyes over the seated firsties waiting to head for breakfast. Nobody looked as though they had slept well. Even Luna looked wrung out, and Harry would have thought nothing could fluster the little bee. Owned. Harry, surprising himself, was in a decent mood. Hermione had not raked him over the coals for his recent revelations, and the more he thought about it, the disclosure in Tongueripper's office that the soul fragment in his scar was able to be removed by the goblins, and the removal would not kill him, made it almost impossible for Harry to feel depressed about anything at the moment. Although a sneaky part of his mind kept popping up more and more, wondering how it would be to really key Hermione if that was another way to remove Riddle from his scar. Classes were attended in the depressed atmosphere, and after dinner, Hermione, followed by Harry, made a point of announcing they were staying in the common room tonight to study. In a short time, the little amount of homework they had was done, the firsties' work was complete, so the two retreated to a couch to read. Neville, sitting on a nearby chair, was reading an advanced herbology book. Hermione was intensely reading the third-year Introduction to Runes book, and Harry was working on the spell book for years 3 to 4. Harry was mildly surprised no one came by to ask for Dada help, as the class had been as useless as usual. Tuesday was no real change. Wednesday the duo sneaked out after curfew to the come-and-go room where Harry covered his previous third year. He worked hard at censoring all the events. He did not mention the firebolt incident or the confrontation in the Shrieking Shack where she had proclaimed, Sirius Black would have to go through her to kill Harry. 1. That talk gave her a solid perspective on Harry's massive effort this year to capture Pettigrew and free Sirius. The parts about the Dementors were scary, and she almost grabbed Harry by his shirt front to shake him until he promised to teach her the Expecto Patronum spell. He had chuckled at her. At her glare, he said that nothing like his past third year could occur because Sirius had been found innocent of all crimes, and Pettigrew was dead. Therefore, the Ministry would have no reason to surround the school with Soul King demons to protect Harry from Sirius Black. Thursday was normal, but Friday saw Harry giving in to the massive pleas from the firsties on up to a couple of third years to please teach them some of what they were supposed to be learning in Dada. Harry gave in mostly because Lockhart had drafted Harry into being the poor, benighted werewolf that the Gleaming Smiler had cured with his fake homorphous charm. After knowing Moony, the whole phony bit of theater had disgusted him. That evening the fourth floor hosted a gathering of mostly Gryffindor students. A few people from other houses were there because they had been invited by friends from Gryffindor. The firsties worked on the fire-making charm, Incendio, and the knockback jinx, Flipendo. The Incendio lesson was very short, as the excitable youngsters would lose focus or turn and carelessly flame their neighbors. Harry and Hermione spent a lot of time putting out fires from wooden chairs or desks, or old tapestries, or on other students' clothes. Luckily, no students were burned. The Flipendo went much better as the 11-year-olds had not developed enough power to power the spell properly. The learning had not gone well until Harry gathered them around and gave them an intense speech about intent. Like a coach getting his team fired up, Harry got them all concentrating like mad, and suddenly it worked. They were now eager and literally cheering each other on. First Luna, then Ginny, then the others followed with ferocious looks of concentration as they got the charm to work. The older students smiled indulgently, but the firsties didn't care. Making an old, busted chair slide 6 inches had the casters beyond excited. Luna making the chair move almost 2 feet had her classmates in awe. For their year mates, Harry picked the Impedimentia Freezing Jinx and the Finite Incancatum General Counter spell. The third years, 2 of whom were Puffs that came with Susan Bones, worked on the Expelliarmus charm and also on the Finite. It was while working with Neville, Harry was stumped by the tremendous effort his friend was putting into his casting. For very meager results. His memory was telling him that this problem had existed all 4 years he had previously known the nervous, downtrodden boy. But this year had seen a boost in his self-confidence, so his continued poor spell work was confusing. As he closely examined the boy's grip and wand movements, both of which were impeccable, he could see despite being polished until it gleamed, the wand had small gouges, numerous nicks, burns and stains on its surface indicating a hard life. That observation brought forth the memory of Ron's first wand. The one that was a hand-me-down from his brother Charlie, with its battered surface and bit of unicorn hair poking out of its tip, that had been broken in the flying car this year. Harry also remembered that the replacement wand from Ollivander had worked much better for the redhead next year. But why would Neville need to use a hand-me-down wand? He had seen at the Yule Ball the Longbottoms were an old, well-off, mansion-owning family complete with large greenhouses according to Neville when he forgot to be nervous and was talking about his passion, herbology. "Neville, you are doing everything properly, but very little results are coming out of your wand tip," Harry said in puzzlement. And then seeking some type of clue, "What kind of magic did you perform when Ollivander handed you this wand?" Neville immediately turned as red as a tomato and mumbled something that Harry couldn't understand. He looked at the nervous boy quizzically. Neville stuttered and stumbled on, "I didn't go to Ollivander. This is my father's wand. My gran says it made him a great wizard, so it'll make me one too." Harry had no idea what to say. Instinctually, he knew the other boy was wrong. But he also had no idea how to prove it. He needed to talk about this with Hermione. Next morning, an owl wearing a Gringotts identity harness arrived at breakfast, and after a piercing examination of Harry, the bird raised its leg that has a scroll tube attached. He took the tube and placed it unobtrusively into an interior robe pocket. Hermione, Neville, Luna, Ginny and 2 other seated firsties calmly treated the whole incident as a perfectly normal incident. The first years talking among themselves had decided that gossiping about Lord Potter with outsiders would probably get them carefully excluded from being within his orbit. And being around Harry had definite possibilities of adventures that someone attending school in a magical castle should have. Harry noted out of the corner of his eye that Grumblysmore had closely watched Harry as the owl had delivered the scroll to him. Since everyone who Harry counted as advisors had seen the owl at breakfast, for the rest of the day he kept getting subtle hints from the other 4 that they would like to know if the owl delivery was important enough to gather for. Harry dodged the questions by saying the goblins wanted to meet with him about an urgent matter about his accounts. Which was true. Just not the whole truth. After breakfast he had Hedwig carry a quick message to Mrs. Tonks asking if she could get Sirius free from St. Mungo's and attend the Gringotts meeting with him and his godfather. Next, he went to see his head of house to inform her he urgently needed to attend a meeting with Gringotts, showing her the rather sternly worded cover letter that stated "at your earliest convenience." That phrase was the polite goblin way of saying, "Get your ass here yesterday," and McGonagall knew it. He did not show her the short letter from Tongueripper telling him he would be meeting with senior management, whom you have met before. That was not the important part. The note was signed, Tongueripper, pending senior account manager, Potter family, accounts. Harry was having a tough time not breaking out in a huge smirk. The clues were all fortuitous. It took a couple of hours, but finally Solicitor Tonks sprung Sirius from durance vile, and McGonagall, understanding that somehow Potter had irritated the goblins, allowed the use of her flow for Harry to go to the leaky cauldron, where the 3 proceeded to the bank. There, as soon as they stepped into the bank, they were met by 2 large, halberd-armed, nasty-looking goblins who escorted them down to Tongueripper's office. It just was not the same office Harry had gone to before. This one was larger, with more ornamentation. It held a bigger, more ornate desk and tea table. The chairs in front of it were of better quality, and when the humans entered, the lighting increased to a more comfortable level from the dimmer lighting the goblins preferred. A tea service had been set on the low table in front of the chairs, and they availed themselves of it. The 3 could tell that Tongueripper was waiting for something, although to Harry, he did not seem nervous about the wait. Harry found himself not surprised when 4 ferocious guards, followed by the fearsome-looking king of the goblins, entered through the side door. Tongueripper immediately sprang from his chair and took a knee. The 3 humans were not slow on the uptake and rose to bow or curtsy low. At a grunt from the king, Tongueripper arose and the other 3 followed his lead. The king stood staring at the young Lord Potter for almost a solid minute before speaking. "Lord Potter, I would advise you to allow Lord Black and Solicitor Tonks to be escorted to another office for a few minutes." If some wizard who was capable of counting the fingers of their left hand and coming up with the answer of 4 found out they knew what our discussion was about, the two of them could be in serious danger from some of the worst dregs of magical society. It was very politely worded, but the other two knew they were being tossed out of the meeting. Tonks remained impassive. Sirius was starting to wind up to do something dumb when Harry stood in front of him and said, "Padfoot, stop. I know why he is doing this, and I agree with him. I swear to you this is probably going to be the friendliest meeting I will probably ever have in this office." The pair locked eyes, steel gray against gleaming green. Anxiety was growing in those gray eyes as he spoke. "Prongslet, I swore I would never fail to keep you safe. I failed once, I won't fail again," anguish lacing through every word. "Sirius, this is a very important meeting, but I repeat, this is a very friendly meeting. I came across some information Tongweripper found interesting enough to investigate. Apparently, he found some answers." Harry reached up and placed his hand on the taller man's shoulder. The world seemed to disappear around the two. "It's all good, Godfather." It took a mighty effort from Sirius to keep from breaking at that point. After a moment, he offered his arm to Solicitor Tonks, and with an accompanying guard left the room. After the door closed, Harry turned and with a smirk threatening to separate his face in two, said, "Greetings, pending Senior Account Manager Tongweripper, may gold keep ever flowing into your vaults." The goblins in the room carefully masked their surprise at a very young lord of a prestigious house giving them a decent greeting in the older respectful way. Harry changed his focus. "Your Majesty, can I assume you have good news, and I will not have to fund a team of goblins spending weeks searching for artifacts within Gringotts?" The addressed goblin returned, "No, you will not." Suddenly, his voice shifted to hard, flat, warrior-like. "The soul part we found was more powerful than any we have ever found before. It managed to possess one of the bank guards who then attacked the rest of the team. 2 goblins died. When the guard was severely wounded, the soul piece then fled him and attempted to possess Cursebreaker Weasley. Though he was already wounded, Cursebreaker Weasley contained the soul wraith as it abandoned the dying warrior and tried to escape." Harry's face morphed over to horror-struck as the goblin spoke. "I'm sorry that my information led to 2 of your warriors dying," Harry said sincerely. The goblins in the room noted he had referred to them as warriors, not goblins, or creatures, or riffraff below his notice. The king decided not to tell him that one of those killed was a mere laborer, low of status even in goblin society. Yet that laborer had died attacking the possessed guard. He and his clan were being honored for his bravery. Knowing that the Cursebreaker was an acquaintance of Lord Potter, as a mark of his growing respect for the young lord, Tongweripper volunteered that Mr. Weasley would recover from his injuries in a few days and would be none the worse for his injuries sustained in defense of Gringotts Bank. "Lord Potter, after the power shown by the Horcrux you discovered lurking in our vaults, I am more inclined than before not to let you leave this bank still contaminated by what is behind your forehead scar," came a growled interjection from the king. "However, both Cursebreaker Weasley and Healer Grokshudara have stated to me that what you have in your forehead is not a full-fledged Horcrux, and if it did not possess you when you were younger and your mind less developed, it cannot do so now." Crap, Harry thought. I was afraid of this or something like it. I have no idea how much I can hint at or tell them without invoking upper management strictures. What Harry was not noticing was that the goblins were watching him closely to see his reaction to the word, Horcrux. Older Harry could tell where this line of probing was going and tried to dissemble. If these Horcruxy things are highly dangerous, perhaps having someone who can actually sense when they are near should. Harry felt the air suddenly thicken around him, suddenly becoming hazy, translucent, and out of nowhere, slightly to his left, was a young woman dressed in some white, flowy dress, whose face he took a moment to recognize. "Annika," he blurted, "what are you doing here? Have I done something wrong? Look, the goblins are just being helpful." He swiveled his head around to look at the king, but every goblin his eyes passed over appeared to be frozen in place. Putting the frozen goblins is something to find out about later, he cast around in his mind wildly. "I haven't told Hermione about you or Zelkindis. I mean she knows about me being older and has guessed I'm reliving my last 2 years, and..." The lovely-looking brunette had just held up her hand in a stop gesture. "No, Harry. You've not done anything wrong. In fact, you are proceeding on your quest rather nicely, and upper management is pleased with your progress. She gave him a nice smile. You have to remember that we do know you are an ill-informed 14/12-year-old and part of your ignorance is the haste with which we had to return your soul back to Earth. Her mien shifted to very serious. Zelkindis is supposed to be the one sent to you from time to time with further advice and even some answers. Fortunately, due to your journey to our plane, she smiled at him again, an approving smile this time, we've discovered a deep cover mole in our organization. It is not only spying for the evil ones, but also suborning members that have worked with us for several millennia. If it had not been for your appearance up there, we would not have known about the deep, many tentacled plot until it had done irreparable damage to many universes. So, you have our thanks, but the downside is our contacts with you will have to cut to an absolute minimum to protect you. If the bad blokes worked hard enough, they could track us on our visits to you. They could then easily send a low-level assassin into this universe or influence an already evil creature to hunt you. Your contact will probably be me, as a powerful being like older Z-Boy would be too visible crossing the planar separations if he were to contact you as much as we usually preferred in these situations. Her face morphed into a frown. Even with full spatial and sidereal cloaking, my time here is very short. Let the goblins help you. Have as much contact with Sirius as possible, he will heal faster. You need a way to have the long-bearded one removed from influence over you. Remember, he believes with all his brilliant idiot brain that behind your scar is a full-blown Horcrux. Ergo, he wants you weak and vulnerable to Riddle so you will die at a convenient time for him to follow up, kill Riddle, and take all the glory. Keep who knows about the Horcruxes to as few as possible. If any of Voldemort's followers even think someone might have information that could return that bastard to this world, they will be tortured mercilessly for any scrap of information. We recommend writing a note to Nicholas Flamel asking about alchemic control potions. Make sure he knows you are the person who saved his stone. Dumbledore was not totally truthful with him about that event. She was starting to fade a little, becoming a bit insubstantial. Sure go Fee, time is up. Let the goblins help. Let Sirius help when his mind is a little more stable. Tell your soulmate everything. Maybe she can help with Dobby. Looking at Harry as her figure paled, she smiled again and said, yes, Harry. It is Hermione. And with no fuss or noise, Annika was gone. Harry was left in the middle of a sentence while speaking to the king. Should be given a chance to find more of these things. Lord Potter, you appear certain there are more of these things to be found. There has never been an instance of a magic user creating more than one. The pure evil its creation takes drives the creators insane, growled the king in his, gravel being crushed, voice. Even as he spoke the words, the king was nearly certain the young lord had already told them Voldemort had made more Horcruxes. The number of dark magic restraining boxes and the sizes he had ordered informed the goblin nation there were more, out there. And not only were there more, but their approximate size. And none of them would have been of size to hold the fabled goblet of the founder Hufflepuff that had been heavily damaged driving out the Horcrux. Either the boy did not know what it was, or he had apparently cold-bloodedly assumed the goblins would take care of it. The taking care of it as quickly as possible had used very nearly the last basilisk venom the goblin nation had possessed. And to the best of his knowledge there was no more to be found at any price. And if the goblins joined the search for the Horcruxes, they would have to do so extremely quietly. Any breath of this reaching his old followers, and they would try to move the Celestial and the Earth to revive their master. With a final nod to Harry, the king left, leaving the preteen shaken. When Sirius and Solicitor Tonks were escorted back into the room, he went over and gave his godfather a Hermione strength hug. Which was returned. The not-so-secret part of the secret meeting continued. The Black Overseer account manager was soon included. The rest of the meeting was Tongweripper telling the three of them that the Lestrange vaults had been penalized by the maximum 85% of their stored wealth allowed under Goblin law, and various treaty stipulations regarding illegal storage of a Class 5 dark artifact without the knowledge or payment of extra vault protection fees to Gringotts. He did not elaborate about the artifact as it was actually of a higher class, but giving it the proper classification might tip someone off as to its nature. And the king wanted to put the temptation of selling that information in as few hands as possible. Goblin betrayals were rare but known to occur for enough gold. They always ended in the betrayer's messy death, but sometimes Sirius' eyebrows nearly climbed into his hairline when Tongueripper announced Harry was going to receive 50% of the confiscated vaults. Gringotts would take 25%, and the black account was to get the remaining 10%. When Sirius saw the total that the 10% added to the black vaults, the look he gave Harry had him wishing he was going to face a Hermione interrogation rather than his godfather's. The Black Overseer account manager finally joined the talk. He explained why the Black family had, at his urging, been awarded part of the Lestrange vaults. The Lestrange family had broken several of the clauses in the marriage contract between Rudolphus Lestrange and Bellatrix Black. In that case, Lord Black could declare the groom's family in default of the contract and should file to have the marriage annulled, and the dowry paid by the Black family recalled. Sirius understood the ramifications immediately. There was not enough money in the Lestrange vaults to repay the dowry. Therefore, their vaults would be stripped, their property and other assets seized until either the debt was repaid or the family were stripped of their last canute. It went unsaid that adding tens of thousands of galleons to the black vaults was perhaps a reason the overseer was pushing the arrangement. Even if the Lestranges escaped from Azkaban, there would be nothing they could give to Voldemort. No money for their master, no property to be used for supply storage, and no safe houses to hide and train new recruits. The loss of funds from such wealthy supporters would probably not be crippling, but it would hurt. Sirius had trouble keeping a smirk off his face as he realized that for the first time in a long time, someone had actually done something that could hurt he who must not be named. The trio left Gringotts for Madame Tonks' office. There, Harry finally looked at the account sheets he had been given showing his new wealth. Surprisingly, he was not overwhelmed by the new riches he had gained. The shocks he had received from learning how much money the Potters had left him, and then having his mother produce another pile of money for him, had frankly left him rather blasé about it all. Having grown up with a total lack of even penny candy money, he was more or less immune to the "I want more" acquisitiveness usually associated with wealth. And since finding he had money at Gringotts, the amount in his trust vault had been more than enough for the rather simple needs he had. As they sat in the shielded office, Harry was not surprised when Sirius demanded to know what had gone on in Tongueripper's office. His mental math had told him that if the black account had just been increased by about 8,000 galleons, Harry had just been gifted around 40,000 galleons by the goblins. By goblins, who everyone knew were tight-fisted, who never let sentiment, or often even fairness, influence their money-making avarice. And they had just gifted Lord Harold Potter a fortune of around 40,000 galleons, approximately £1,400,000. And how in Lorgini's Seven Hells had Harry made the acquaintance, the friendly acquaintance, of the King of the Goblins? Harry threw a quick glance at Madame Tonks. He really did not want to put her in danger by having her find out what was going on with the Horcruxes. As much as it hurt him, Harry decided to tell only part of the truth. There were other things in the Potter vault other than Mum's grimoire. In her diary, she wrote about a dark artifact that Bella Lestrange had stolen during a raid on a family named Clurton. During our talks about her money in the Muggle world, I mentioned it to Tongueripper. I guess they followed up on my comment and found something. It was only a partial misrepresentation. The diary story, the raid, Bellatrix Lestrange, and some artifact that seemed to be the reason for the Death Eater's attack were true. Unsaid was that Hufflepuff's cup was not the artifact. Sirius gave him a thunderous look and opened his mouth to say something when Harry mildly said, "I would hate to tell you some secret that affected you so badly, you might want to talk about it to your mind healer. You are already suspicious that someone at St. Mungo's is taking orders, and probably passing information to, the great bearded wanker. What say we keep him in the dark as long as possible?" It took almost another week before Hermione felt she had devoted enough research time to talk in depth with Harry about whatever had petrified the students. He had tried being helpful by telling her to ignore acromantulas. 1. They weren't guilty last time, and 2. Dumbledore had not mentioned any bite marks on the bodies. When the ever-curious girl had pressed Harry on why she should ignore them, he told her of his and Ron's trip to Aragog, the monster-sized acromantula leader's nest. And how close they came to being served as spider snacks. He also made an offhand comment about how the nest seemed to be getting large and the only thing keeping them from attacking the school kids for food was the old, sick Aragog. The thought went through his mind that maybe he should wake up Slytherin's monster and find out if it liked eating huge spiders. A trade-off for not killing school kids perhaps. Last time, it had woken up very hungry. What had Ginny fed it? And how? 1,000-year-old starving basilisk would have fought its bondage fang and scale to find some food. After all, it would know nothing of the Acromantula threat being in the Forbidden Forest because the last time it was awake, Aragog was a wee pet of Hagrid's. Hermione almost instantly became a bundle of nerves, having found out more things that seemed perfectly rational to her friend yet were enough to scare her into nightmares. When sternly questioned, he just shrugged and said his idea of terrifying had become kind of a new normal because something very scary or dangerous had happened every year. He had tried to ease her stress by telling the tale of the other Christmas with her perfect brewing of Polyjuice potion. And he worked at making light of her turning into a catgirl due to trying to use Bulstrode's hair and accidentally using hair from the girl's cat. He told her about the others who had been petrified last time. Colin, the camera-fixated, hyper first year. Justin Finch-Fletchley from Hufflepuff and the Gryffindor ghost, Sir Nicholas de Mimsy-Porpington, being ghost-petrified. And with great hesitation, he told about herself and Penelope Clearwater being found near the library, frozen like stone. He did not mention how weeks later he found her message telling him it was a basilisk and how the word, pipes, told him how the monster was sneaking about the castle. Her reaction when he told her how many weeks of classes she had missed was not what he expected or wanted. Missing all that learning time. Missing all that reading time. She ranted about it for days. He also boggled her mind by relating how he, Ron and her had passed the diary amongst themselves after he had found it discarded in Myrtle's bathroom after the bewitched person had made a mighty effort and thrown it away. Then what happened? A repulsed, but curious Hermione said. After a long pause Harry whispered, nothing. It didn't radiate evil like it does now. You had to write in it for it to create a path into your mind because it would answer back. And it was very understanding and sympathetic. Like a best friend. And then the possessed person had a buried compulsion to steal it back. It was right after that the Wraith retook possession of the girl and leaving a last message, took her down to the chamber so he could steal her life force and return himself to the living. She was horrified. Next day after classes they were sitting together in the library under that nifty little privacy spell she had convinced Greengrass to teach her and went over what she had found. Medusae, Gorgon, Cockatrice. Those are the only creatures I found in the library that petrify. The come-and-go room could not give me anything more. Even when I used it to access the restricted section. There was nothing there not on the regular shelves, she said in a petulant voice. She was taking the fact that her beloved books were not gifting her with the knowledge she wanted as a personal affront. And the cockatrice probably would have eaten the petrified victims. She rotated in her chair until looking directly at Harry. It's time to tell me what Slytherin's monster is. I'm wasting time if you know. Harry stared her in the eye. There was no give in her return look. Basilisk, he said very quietly. If you think about it, it goes along with that whole snake motif of Slytherin House. Basilisks don't petrify. Their gaze kills, that's why I didn't include it, she replied after a moment's recall of what she had read. Harry quickly glanced around them. No one was close. Last time everyone saw it as a reflection. In a wet floor, through a camera, through a brave ghost, or in a makeup mirror that you were looking around corners with as you and Penny fled the library. That's how you get only petrified instead of being killed. That and I haven't heard it roaming the school. How do you hear a basilisk? They are a large snake. Snakes speak Parseltongue. He concentrated for a moment, imagining a snake on an open book. Hungry. Rip, tear, kill for food. Harry said in Parseltongue. Hermione looked creeped out. It took Harry a moment to recollect that he had not been unmasked as a Parselmouth at the disastrous dueling exhibition that had not taken place this year. Last time I could hear it as it moved through the plumbing in the walls. Haven't heard a word this time, he said, a wry look twisting his features. Hermione's brain finally connected the obvious dots, and in a panicked voice she shrieked, "You're telling me there is a basilisk under the school in the Chamber of Secrets? How did it get there, I mean?" Her voice shut off as Harry quickly placed a hand over her rambling mouth and just looked at her. "It's been there 1,000 years, Hermione, and since it's called Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, I reckon he placed it there." If possible, her look became even more horrified. Harry was finding he did not like that look on her. Harry gathered her in a hug while keeping an eye out for Madame Pants. Being caught hugging would probably get them thrown out of the library at a minimum. It took a few moments, but her reading came back to her. She pointed at a book. That book says a basilisk can be killed by the crowing of a rooster, she said very quietly. Yes, he replied, a strange look starting on his face. And this time the ones Hagrid has raised have not been killed by the girl possessed by the diary. Idiot, 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 he ranted in his mind. I completely forgot about reading that sentence on the torn page I found in her hand last time. A disagreeable thought struck him. I've let myself become so dependent on Hermione because of her research skills that I've become lazy. I could have saved her days of work with my knowledge if only I had sat here with her. By the way, Mr. Potter, she said with an increasing glare at him. You had better come up with a very good reason why I have put many hours into researching a monster you already know about. He replied quietly. Since it's not the basilisk, I have absolutely no idea what petrified these other kids. I was hoping you could tell me. Suddenly, the amplified voice of Assistant Headmistress McGonagall reverberated through the halls and rooms of Hogwarts. All students are to go to their common rooms immediately. Anyone found outside of their house common room after 10 minutes will receive punishment. The Gryffindor common room was in chaos as everyone in the room tried to find out if the students who came pelting in through the portrait knew what was going on or what had happened. Neville had no information when the two asked him. Luna, Ginny and Abigail eased up to the still standing, occasionally talking trio. Luna spoke very quietly to them, Harry, we can't find Verbena. The other boys say Colin and Michael are not up in the dorm either. Left unspoken was the worry that something had happened to their missing classmates. Harry was literally praying that they hadn't met the basilisk. It was Ginny who spoke up. Colin has been talking all week about finding what petrified those boys and saying that if he could take a picture of it he could probably sell it to the prophet for a lot of gold. The six of them looked at each other. Luna said what they were thinking first. You don't think he convinced Michael and Verbena to go with him, and they went down in the dungeons looking for it, and... There was silence. Hermione spoke into the void, maybe they just got lost somewhere, and the professors are going to have to look for them. She did not sound very convinced of her own statement though. The group found an unoccupied corner where they were slowly joined by the remaining first years looking for reassurance that nothing had happened to their missing classmates. The older trio tried to be quietly upbeat that the missing would soon be found. Eventually, they all fell silent. As one might expect, Hermione pulled a book from her bag and started reading. The surrounding silence disturbed only by her quiet turning of a page. Everyone else had a 1,000-yard stare, even if they were looking at something. Everyone jumped as a door in the far wall that Harry had never noticed before opened into the common room. Through the opening strode a rigid-backed, lips drawn in a thin line, Professor McGonagall. As the room was just starting to swell with student questions, she stopped and said in an utterly disapproving voice, 3 of your housemates went off on a very foolish search today. And now they are paying the price for having acted outside of school rules. She paused for a moment in the silence before continuing with that complete tone of disapprobation she used when speaking about rule breakers and miscreants. They were found in the dungeons, petrified. She looked around the room before delivering her follow-up. Does anyone here have any information on why those 3 were exploring the dungeons? Speak up if you know anything. She swept her gimlet eye around the room again, pausing to give Harry some extra attention before sweeping on. Everyone in the room was looking at everyone else to see who might know something. After glancing around, the firsties firmly kept their mouths shut. Ginny had thoroughly indoctrinated her classmates into what her miscreant older brothers had taught her about, never say you're guilty until they prove you're guilty. Plus, McGonagall was liable to pile on a couple of detentions for not daubing on their mates if she thought they should have stopped them. Asterisk. Harry was pissed off. The measures that the faculty put in place for their protection against the unknown attackers were preventing him from taking any action that might solve the crisis. Among the measures was all mail leaving the school was to be examined by the ministry and not allowed if too descriptive of the lockdown. The claim was that they were trying to keep the heir of Slytherin from communicating with any conspirators outside of the school. The only glimmer of silver lining was that his good friend Dumbledore was again unable to pay much attention to him. The Daily Prophet was flagellating him every day. He was only hanging on to his headmaster's job by calling in every favor and debt owed to him by many people. That and the argument that if the force of Aurors now seen regularly in the halls and passages of the ancient school did not stop the petrifications, a powerful wizard hero such as himself would be needed. The students were escorted by Aurors, professors and prefects, marched to classes, meals, back to their common rooms and to the library. The last had Hermione spectacularly upset, as the herders of the studious always wanted to quit and chivvy them out because they wanted to do something else long before curfew. Harry and Hermione remarked that Malfoy had been remarkably circumspect in his blaming Potter for all the troubles as time passed. Gossip was that during a rant against Potter, an Auror had overheard and demanded that if he had proof Lord Potter was to blame, he present it to the DMLE. When a stuttering Draco backed down, he received a stern, very public lecture about false accusations. Harry was pissed off because the plans he had made to find out about the Room of Hidden Things and the Chamber of Secrets had blown up in his face. He now had to stop his partially hatched plan to try to persuade the basilisk to be friendly, or at least helpful, and kill off the Acromantulas. That had come to a screaming halt. He really didn't want to fight that damn snake. His following the rules efforts lasted barely 2 weeks. In spite of Annika's visit, he was feeling pressured. He did not have much of a plan, but he felt he was desperate. He had decided that Hagrid could be someone who would help him. The half-giant was so enamored of large, dangerous beasties that Harry figured he would jump at the chance to see a basilisk. He became so fixated on getting free of the school to go talk to Hagrid about roosters and maybe as a boar spear-carrying backup if things went into the pot, that he forgot that Hagrid was so loyal to Zumbledore that he would tell the headmaster Harry's plan if he had a chance. He also wanted to talk to the Sorting Hat. He needed Gryffindor's goblin-forged sword. Hermione's research had told him something he didn't know. Normal metals disintegrated when exposed to basilisk venom. If he was going to destroy Horcruxes by stabbing them with basilisk venom, he needed a goblin-forged blade. Even a dagger would do. But Gryffindor's sword had a prestige about it that should buy him credibility if and when he would have to show that the Horcruxes could be destroyed. He needed to write to Tongueripper to see if he could purchase some type of goblin-forged weapon. That thought led him towards wondering just how did the goblins destroy the Hufflepuff goblet Horcrux. He would have to ask that question directly to Tongueripper. Which meant a meeting in Gringotts, and Harry did not have the excuse of a Wizengamot session to get out of the castle. He did not dare ask in writing. He would wager some galleons Grumblebore had, for safety reasons, put some type of interception spell on Hedwig since the lockdown. He was going to have to sneak around under his cloak. He had not said a word of this to Hermione, but she was giving him the look that said she knew he was planning something. Something that might get him caught. So, she was keeping a close eye on him. The announcement at lunch that the foreign mandrakes had arrived. That was good news, as the ones being grown in Greenhouse 3 would not be mature for several months. Their very own potions master, Professor Severus Snape, would brew the potion that would be given to those petrified students tomorrow afternoon. The news had lifted everyone's spirits. Most of the talk at the tables was about how they would get answers from the victims as how, who or what had attacked them. The petrified students were not seen by dinner the next day. Yet everybody knew that all of them had not really seen their attackers. They all told of shadows that came out of the walls. When the shadows touched them, they knew no more. Harry watched as the Great Hall became a hotbed of stories. It seemed that intangible shadows were more deliciously horrifying than some 3-month-old painted vague threat. When he mentioned this to Hermione, she answered, "Basilisks can be found in books. The unknown, coming out of the dark, is always way more scary." That night, the revived 3 miscreants were brought back to the common room. After a blistering dressing down by Professor McGonagall, where their detentions for an entire month were announced, they headed over to Harry where the other second years were gathered. Michael barely got the word, "Harry," out when he was loudly interrupted. "Quiet, Galforge," began some 6th year named Donald something. The teen switched targets. "Creevy, did you get any pictures with that useless camera you're always lugging around?" A red-faced, squirming Colin admitted he had tried, but he didn't think he had any pictures because the first they had known they were under attack was when a black shadow whacked the camera out of his hands with something. Under more questioning, the 3 recollected that they hadn't been that deep in the dungeons when one of the few wall torches had gone out, leaving them in darkness. At that point Michael pulled his wand out of a robe pocket. Colin was carrying his camera, and Verbena and I had our wands out when the torch went out. We heard Colin yelp and then heard his camera hit the floor. Me and Verbena tried to get Illumos from our wands but we had trouble getting them to light. Unsaid was they were so scared at that point the terrified 11-year-olds had been unable to perform the spell properly. He pinked up with embarrassment when some of the older students scoffed at the youngins for botching the spell. I have to tell you that only made it worse as our flickering wands seemed to cause moving shadows everywhere. And that's when everything went blank. I seem to recall some maybe sounds while we were in the infirmary, but I don't remember anything between the dungeon and being woken up there with that really horrible tasting potion in my mouth. A piece of advice: don't get petrified. That potion they gave us has an awful aftertaste. Hermione had side-eyed Harry through their housemate's tale. Harry had been planning something for weeks. That he had not talked with her about his plan was disturbing. Her problem, as she saw it, was if she tried subtle questioning, he would catch on and become even sneakier. That this older Harry was smart and more intelligent than last year meant that maybe his plan might work. However, she wasn't going to put any sickles on that happening. Unbeknownst to Hermione, Harry had also been working on getting the diadem of Ravenclaw from where it was hidden. He managed to get a quick plotting session with Hermione in a corner of the common room while under that nifty anti-eavesdropping spell she did so well. "Harry, if we get caught, we'll be in so much trouble," she said determinedly. "We could get killed trouble or could get expelled trouble," he replied with a smirk. It took great restraint, but she did not whack him with the book in her hands. That evening during the escorted trip to the library, the pair of brave Harry or foolhardy Hermione Gryffindors drifted off into an alcove without being seen. Donning his invisibility cloak, they carefully headed to the 5th floor east. There, Harry as quietly as possible, called for Elf Gurna. With only their heads floating in the air, they unfortunately gave the elf a fright. After calming down the normally unflappable elf, Harry requested that all their trackers and listening charms be removed. A dozen floating red dots later, Harry took off his cloak and knelt to talk to the diminutive elf. "Elf Gurna, you once said that the come-and-go room could be dangerous. Something about cursed things, cursed items." The elf's eyes bulged out in distress. "Student Potter, you should not create the room of hidden things. It is dangerous. There is a reason we elves do not spend time in that room working to clean it and tidy it up. It used to be we merely had to be careful. We do not know what happened but suddenly something so bad in there made us elves feel sickly and ill." Harry paused in thought for a moment, trying hard to remember the riddle page from upper management that told him Riddle's birthday, and did some quick math and added 15 years as a guess for when Tom might have returned to the castle. "Did this sickness start about 30 years ago?" he asked, half talking to himself. Gurna nodded rapidly, ears flopping, tears glistening in his eyes. "Yes, until then being allowed to clean it had been used as a reward given to hard-working elves by the head elf during the summer when the students were gone and there was not much work to be done." 1. Harry just kept looking at the little distressed elf. "That is too bad that there is a place in the castle that you cannot keep clean. However, I think that Hermione and I can find the cursed artifact that makes you sick, remove it from the room, and then the castle. Student Potter and Student Granger, you would do this for the elves and for Hogwarts," said Elf Gurna. Hermione came and knelt next to Harry. "Yes, Elf Gurna. For Hogwarts." "Yes," said Harry. "For the elves of Hogwarts." Gurna reached out, touched them both, and a second later the three of them were standing in the dead-end hall on the 7th floor west next to the picture of Barnabas the Barmy trying to teach trolls how to dance. They were puzzled as this was the entrance to the come-and-go room. The elf stepped across the hallway, paced 3 times back and forth, and a larger-than-usual dark oak door appeared in the opposite wall. The elf spoke quietly, "I will not stay here with you students. When you are done, call for me. I will get you back to the library before you are missed." With his wand in hand, Harry pushed open the door and taking Hermione's in his other hand he advanced into the 4-pace hallway into the largest room either had seen in the castle. A quiet pop behind him was Gurna leaving. Hermione was the first to recover from her shock at seeing the immense chamber. "Oh, my God, Harry," she said in a strangled whisper. "How are we ever going to search this place? The far end of the room was out of sight. There were piles of junk, hills of broken, battered trunks and mountains of busted, stained and partially burnt furniture. Narrow little footpaths wound around everything, but sight distances were short. From here they could see a bit. They were on a 6-step dais above the floor. Light came in through many very dusty windows and illuminated the dust floating in the air. Harry was feeling overwhelmed also. Yet he knew this was the right place. His scar was starting to ache. Just then they both saw the blue body of a Cornish pixie flutter across from one pile of junk to another. Hermione immediately whipped her wand out. The blonde Ponce's first class had left an indelible memory in all who had been there. "Let's go," Harry said calmly as he checked his battered, strap-repaired wristwatch. "We need to finish before we're missed. I reckon we have less than 2 hours." The pair stepped down and entered a pathway. Harry was about to ask Hermione if she knew some way to mark where they had walked when she pointed her wand at the floor and muttered something that vaguely sounded like Calavera, but different. The close-fitting gray stone floor suddenly had a stripe of bright pink paint with half an arrowhead pointing in the direction they were walking. He shot her a questioning look. "In 50 yards we are not going to have a clue which direction or which turns we took." She looked at him archly. "We do have to find our way out of here." 2 hours, you said." The two kept walking. They took the twists and turns on some vague feelings that Harry's scar gave him. Hermione kept marking the floor, making sure to make curved lines at all intersections of the paths. She also found some old parchment sheets that she gave to Harry as material to be used for his transfigured silvery containment pouch. It was only about 20 minutes later when Harry, who was definitely starting to flag as the pain in his forehead kept increasing, stuck his arm out barring her from advancing any further. "There," he ground out. "Straight ahead. That tiara-looking thing with the blue stone. There, sitting on a plaster-looking bust of a woman was a dusty, cheap, fake-looking diadem with a large blue stone, and what looked like part of a mop draped over it and the head of the bust." Hermione immediately started to walk over while reaching out to grab it. "Hermione, stop." "Why, Harry? See how pretty it looks, all sparkling brightly. Look at the size of that sapphire. Every girl in the castle will be jealous of me." Her voice had a want in it that he had not heard before, and her eyes never left the diadem. Harry carefully eased his wand until it was pointed near her. "Is it talking to you? What's it telling you?" "It's telling me that if I wear it, it'll make me very intelligent. And that I'll look pretty wearing it." She took a hesitant half-step forward. "Do you think I'll look pretty if I wear it for you? Would you key me then?" Harry's brain shorted out. Key her? Yes. But then his brain cells unscrambled as she took another step and her reaching hand almost touched the diadem. "Immobilis!" he cried, the shout making the pain in his scar spike. Hermione froze on the spot. Harry knew the spell would work only for a few moments. Moving quickly, he pointed Hermione away from the diadem, plucking her wand from her hand as he did so. He pointed his wand at the sheets of parchment and started the transfiguration spell. He flubbed it. He was about to start again when a screech from behind informed him Hermione was able to move again and she sounded upset. Whipping around, he barely managed to immobilize her again just before she crashed into him, a balled-up fist flashing towards his face. He turned his attention back to the parchment and this time blocked out everything and concentrated his intent into the spell. Hoc in perpetuum muta. With one hand he snatched up the now argentum and acromantula silk pouch, with the other, he carefully whipped the mop off the diadem and bust. Grabbing the pouch from the outside he picked up the diadem, flipped the pouch over, shook it into the bottom of the bag and flipped the top over the opening. Immediately the pain started fading from his scar. A sound from in back of him had him turn to see Hermione collapsed in a pile on the floor. With the Horcrux in the pouch, its thrall had broken and control of her body had returned to her. Harry hustled over and kneeling gathered her in his arms. This was his soul mate. It was about time he started showing some of those warm feelings he had always had for her. He still did not know how to show his affection towards her, but he figured he had better start working in that direction. Hermione came out of her foggy daze finding herself wrapped up in her crush's arms, being held just like those trashy romance novels she would indulge herself with. This was wonderful. She was tucked in against his neck over his shoulder. She could smell that spicy aftershave her mother had bought him for Christmas. Parchment and broom wax added to that smell that was uniquely her friend. She blushed and buried herself a little deeper as a thought skittered through her mind. I sure wouldn't mind if he started thinking of me as more than just his friend. Meanwhile, Harry was thanking God, Merlin or whomever that he had been fast enough to keep that spirit from taking over her mind. He had no idea if a spirit-possessed Hermione could have injured or killed him, but he was going to work very hard at not finding out. He was also giving thanks that this particular Horcruxes seemed to be less powerful than the diary. She blushed and buried herself a little deeper as a thought skittered through her mind. I sure wouldn't mind if he started thinking of me as more than just his friend. Meanwhile, Harry was thanking God, Merlin or whomever that he had been fast enough to keep that spirit from taking over her mind. He had no idea if a spirit-possessed Hermione could have injured or killed him, but he was going to work very hard at not finding out. He was also giving thanks that this particular Horcruxes seemed to be less powerful than the diary. After the come-and-go room, Harry, Hermione, Neville, and the Potter protégés were seated at a large table in the common room continuing to work on homework. Everything seemed quite normal except Neville kept side-eyeing the other two. The boy felt something was off, but could not figure out what. Harry could have told him but would not have. Neville was not good enough at occlumency to keep secrets from Lumplepore and Snape. And what had happened in the room earlier, and what it had contained, was super secret. Remembering the room, the pair had spent around half an hour recovering from their ordeal. As they knelt on the harsh stone floor, Harry wanted to transfigure something into a blanket, but the thought of what possible curses and potions might be on the original material had him deciding against that idea. His eyes finally lit upon the partial mop head that had been on the bust and tiara. He'd already touched it and nothing bad had happened. A further argument was the strands apparently had not cursed whoever had placed it on the bust in some form of humor. A quick accio, a pouring of transfiguration intent through his wand, and they had a nice warm blanket to cuddle in. Any fluttering of wings or the skittering of tiny claws were pretended not to be heard. They sat, holding on to each other, and Hermione tried with partial success to explain how it felt to have her mind invaded. They spent the last minutes looking around at the mountainous masses of detritus around them in awe. As she said, this room is 1,000 years old, and there used to be so many more students than there are now, but this amount of sheer junk is ridiculous. A quick look at his still new feeling watch and he reminded her they did have a deadline if they wanted Gurna's help in not getting caught and having slipped their minder's leash. On the trip back, Harry made sure to praise Hermione's foresight in marking their route, and when he asked why she wasn't removing the arrows, she shrugged and said she had made them to be temporary, and they would disappear in a couple of hours. When they reached the dais at the door, Harry called for Elf Gurna. When the little guy popped in, Harry asked him, "Do you still feel sick when you're here now?" The elf took 3 or 4 steps into the room and slowly turned completely around twice before bowing deeply to Harry. "Student Lord Potter, eyes can feel some bad things still, but yous has removed the sickness from the room of lost things. We's will be able to clean and tidy this chamber starting this student's gone time." Both Harry and Hermione smiled at that because they both had that sense of having done something good. Then Hermione frowned. "Elf Gurna, if you want to do the work to clean dusty, dirty rooms, why do you not clean the old classrooms during our summer holiday instead of waiting for this chamber to be cleansed of the sickness curse? I know some of us would like a clean place to meet with friends from other houses besides Gryffindor." The elf's ears drooped and he looked down at the floor. "The headmaster has forbidden us to clean the rooms not needed. He says they's not important. But we's like helping students. The room we's cleaned for yous for your birthing day was the first we's cleaned in years." The two humans looked at each other. Harry marked it down to the old man wanting to show the decline of Hogwarts for some unknown reason. For Hermione, it was another blow to her crumbling pedestal that she had placed the headmaster on. The now trio stepped out into the 7th floor corridor. Asterisk. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Give it to me. The scream blasted them from an arm's reach away. Gurna disappeared with a pop and a cut-off squawk. Hermione leapt backwards into Harry, and both sprawled to the floor, limbs askew and tangled. The diadem stayed in the pouch as it skidded across the floor, but the cover flopped off, exposing the open pouch. Immediately, Harry's scar exploded in pain. Hermione whimpered as the feeling of slimy tentacles invading her mind returned. When Harry's brain caught up with his scattered wits, he saw a wailing ghost of a woman kneeling over the pouch trying to pick it up, but failing as she could not affect the material world that way. He dove through the female ghost, fighting the drenching cold from passing through her, flipping the cover back over the pouch as he rolled away. Once again, his scar ache started to fade. Hermione uncurled herself from being rolled in a ball and launched herself at Harry. Having her mind toughly invaded twice in a short period of time had deeply affected her. The ghost of the woman stayed kneeling on the floor, wailing in anguish. Harry just sat on the stone for a moment, hugging Hermione, and watching the female spirit. He was just beginning to stand up because he figured the noise was going to bring someone to investigate and they had to get out of there when suddenly the creepy house ghost of Slytherin, the Bloody Baron, silvery blood coating his spectral robes and chains appeared, rising from out of the floor. He seemed to wrap his arms around the loudly lamenting woman ghost. Harry could hear the basso whisperings as it tried to comfort the completely distraught female spirit. A quick glare at Harry had him hoisting Hermione to her feet and they started to reel their way down the corridor. He now was hearing a mass of noise getting louder from in front of him. Someone was coming to find out what was going on. In desperation, Harry quietly called, "Elf Gurna." A heartbeat later, the elf popped in. "Please take us to the library," Harry requested, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. The elf looked past Harry to the two ghosts. The Baron looked up briefly and gave a short nod, and a moment later the two students were standing in a back aisle hidden between two rows of books. Harry dove an arm into his robes and came out with his invisibility cloak. A practiced swirl and the huddled tightly together pair disappeared from sight. Seeing no one nearby, he prodded Hermione towards a chair at a nearby table. He sat the still shocked Hermione and dug her backpack out of his backpack. Yanking several books out of both, he added a sticking charm to the pouch cover and carefully stuffed the Horcruxes, one containing pouch, into his backpack, and his cloak back into a robe pocket. He had barely gotten books, parchment, and ink arranged, when Percy Weasley came up and brusquely told them to pack up. It was time to leave for the common room. Cursing Percy's name, Harry repacked their school stuff. He pondered if he had messed up taking Hermione to gather up the Horcruxes. She had not objected when told to leave the library early, and was still not speaking, seemingly lost in her mind. He had settled his backpack and slung hers over his shoulder when with no warning she glommed onto him with a full-strength Hermie hug. She was not crying, she did not say anything, she just held him tight. "I will get better," she whispered in his ear. "I will not remain a drag upon you while you do what has to be done. I understand so much more now. However, soon you will tell me everything. I will need to know all in order to truly help you." She then gave him a quick peck on his cheek, and grabbing his hand started for the library doors, a suddenly dazed Harry being towed behind. When the pair reached the common room, Hermione pulled out her books, parchment and quills. Harry looked at her confused. He had been positive she would want answers to what had happened earlier in the evening. He joined her at the table, hauling his homework out also. He was surprised when he barely heard her say, "There are way too many ears nearby. Perhaps tomorrow we can go back to our library." It took a moment before he realized that rule-breaker Hermione had decided to reappear with vengeance. He allowed that crooked smirk to show on his face as he contemplated that the reputations of Lockhart and Dumbledore were going to take some hard knocks in the near future. Next morning, the pair had Neville and Luna in tow as they traveled to the Great Hall for breakfast. Neville was going on about having Dada tutoring by Harry class tonight. Luna had just smiled that, "Something is going to happen," smile. Suddenly everyone walking in front of them spread to the sides of the hallway. The reason was obvious. Standing in the middle of the hallway was the ghost of the silver blood-drenched Bloody Baron, premier ghost of Slytherin House. Now that Harry had a chance to clearly see the spirit, he saw every medieval romance novel's fantasy of a knight. Tall, broad-shouldered, long wavy hair, mature without being old. The silvery blood and the many chains draped over those broad shoulders did nothing to ruin the imposing nature of the ghost before them. From the way he looked at the four, and especially giving that hollow-eyed glare at Harry, he had been waiting for him or them. Harry had the stray thought that the Baron was quite intimidating when just being normal. When he was concentrating on you personally, he became very scary. Harry stopped abruptly with the other two mimicking him half a step later. Harry could feel Hermione on his side, gripping his arm so hard he knew she had cut off all blood flow to it. Neville was starting to shake until Luna took his hand and leaned against his side. Lord Potter, I am Baron Ralden Godric Peverell, the spectre intoned in a voice that seemed to come out of a deep hollow. May I have a moment of your time? He gestured to a door that opened off the hallway. The grip Hermione had on his arm told him he was not going alone. When Neville seemed he was going to gather the courage to follow, Harry gave him a small head shake. Luna continued to look upon the whole scene as though it was a perfectly normal morning happenstance. Lead on, Sir Baron, said Harry in a voice he hoped did not waver too much. They headed for the door and pushed it open into a side chamber neither had been in since the sorting ceremony back in first year. The ghost merely floated through the wall as Harry closed the door. Harry pulled up short as he espied the other occupant, though non-living, of the room. The ghost turned around at the entrance of the two living persons. The ghost of the rather beautiful woman from last night slowly glided over towards Harry. The Baron cleared his throat like a rumbling bass drum and spoke. Lord Potter, it would please me for you to make the acquaintance of Lady Helena Ravenclaw. My lady, before you is Lord Harold Potter. How did he know that? Thought Harry. Harry decided on a quick bow to something. That was probably related to the founder, Rowena Ravenclaw. Hermione copied him except with a shaky curtsy. The ghost returned a curtsy of her own to Harry. The three looked at each other for many seconds with the Baron looking on. Harry could now see that although carefully covered, the dress the young spirit was wearing had a rip over her heart, but no silvery blood showing. Puzzling. The spirit he now knew had been Helena Ravenclaw spoke in a rush. Lord Potter, what have you done with the diadem? Do you know what is wrong with it? Do you know what will happen if someone finds that you have it? He contemplated the ghost for a moment. He had just opened his mouth when Hermione burst out, that's the lost diadem of Ravenclaw. It has been missing for over 900 years. If you knew where it was, why didn't you tell anyone? She turned to Harry. Rowena Ravenclaw is supposed to have created it. It's believed to make the wearer super intelligent. Many magical scholars claim that the reason for her many accomplishments was due to creating it and then wearing it. She invented apparition, and a slew of charms that we still use today. Some connection must have been made in her mind. She suddenly snapped her mouth closed and refused to look at the spectral woman in front of her. Harry decided to re-enter the conversation. Yes, I know it is the diadem of Ravenclaw. I also know what Tom Riddle has done to it. I tell you now that I know how to kill the spirit it now contains. Unfortunately, the only way I know of removing the spirit will destroy the container of the foul spectre. He paid attention to the face of the ghost as he talked. He watched her face as it crumbled the further he went into his explanation. No, 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 was the woman's constantly repeated whisper as she slowly collapsed to her knees. The ghost of the Baron slowly walked over and stood next to her. He appeared to be offering her support during her agony. Feeling very uncomfortable with what he was watching, Harry glanced over at Hermione. She was watching him closely. As he ran back over what he had said to the ghost of Helena he wanted to smack himself in the head. He had babbled everything and Hermione was going to pin him down like he was a butterfly on display until she got her answers. Suddenly, the young girl's eyes went wide, and she turned back to the ghost. However, in all the histories of Red, there is no mention of a daughter and that the Ravenclaw line died with Rowena's death. The girl's gaze sharpened as she addressed the ghost directly. You are the Grey Lady, known in the castle for only rarely talking to the students. Harry just said that the diadem had to have left the castle sometime. Yet, somehow Voldemort found the diadem and befouled it. How did he find it? That got Harry back into the talk as he thought out loud. It had to have taken it out of the castle. The ritual to make one of these soul containers involves the use of extremely dark magic. I think even as bad as Dumbledore acts now, even he would have noticed such a blast of dark magic occurring in Hogwarts 50 years ago. You're right, Hermione. How did Riddle find out the diadem wasn't hidden in the castle? He had to have found the diadem somewhere else. How did he know where to look? The duo's quiet speculations had the ghost of Helena curling tighter and tighter into herself. Harry knew self-guilt. He was still carrying dragon loads of it around after all. Unloved by the Dursleys. Despite all his trying, it was never good enough. Harry could spout the litany. He had finally quit trying 6 years ago. He knew it was not his fault, but it nagged at him and the guilt of not being good enough sometimes appeared out of nowhere. It right pissed him off he still could be affected by that part of his history. Harry was beginning to get some idea of what may have happened to the ghost while she had lived. Everybody now knows that I was raised by muggles. Something I don't tell people is that they are the worst sort of people. They have an unhealthy bias towards what they consider normal. And to them, being magical, I was anything but normal. Harry sighed deep in his chest. What I don't say is that they have abused me all my life. You would not believe how hard as a child I worked to make them love me. How I worked to have them tell me I had done something, anything, well or was appreciated by them. I finally gave up when I was 9 years old. Harry stopped and stared down at his shoes for several long moments. When he raised his head again, tears could be seen creeping down his cheeks. I still have not succeeded in ever getting even one kind word from them. He whispered, not one, as he looked directly at the ghost of Helena. A moment later, he transferred his stony, questioning gaze to the ghost of Baron Ralden Godric Peverell, house ghost of Slytherin House, the hotbed of pure blood supremacy at Hogwarts. The Baron stared back for a moment before placing his right hand over his heart and bowing to Harry. The boy would have sworn he could hear the chains draped over the ghost clink. Harry decided to accept the gesture as a promise of silence and perhaps a sign of fidelity due to how he had, and was, treating the spirit of Helena Ravenclaw. I have one card left to play. I will try to save the diadem one last time, possibly over vernal equinox. Holiday. He raised his hand palm out. But only one try. I will not keep the contaminated diadem around. The followers of Tom Riddle would slaughter every person, down to every child in this castle, if it meant they might be able to revive their Dark Lord. One word to the wrong ears could see the worst bloodletting slaughter in Britannia in centuries. Harry stood there shifting his gaze between the broken spirit and her succoring ghost. He turned and taking Hermione's hand, reopened the door, and stepped back into the corridor making sure the door was secured from anyone casually entering. Seeing the other pair that had waited for them, they entered the great hall for breakfast. Neville still looked confounded. Luna was smiling as though she had seen something nice and interesting occur. As they entered the great hall, the mass of conversations dropped considerably as word had been spread at the speed of juicy gossip that Harry Potter had been waylaid by the Bloody Baron and taken into a private room for some type of discussion. Everybody wanted to know what had happened as the Baron rarely talked. His presence was so intimidating that if he found you doing something he disapproved of, a look, and a simple gesture, were almost always enough to send the transgressor fleeing to supposed safety. Ignoring them all, Harry sat in the area where the second and now first years ate. He was gathering his breakfast and had filled his goblet with pumpkin juice when his Potter ring heated up to almost burning. A quick check had it heat up again, and additionally flare bright blue as he grasped the goblet again, eliciting gasps from those seated nearby. Everyone, check your food and drink, Harry said, raising his voice over the surrounding babble. It was then he noticed Hermione had frozen and her right hand was clutching at the front of her jumper, wadding it up in her grasp. He figured she was almost being burned by her necklaces as they must have reacted to her food. He saw her wave her left hand with its protection ring over her goblet. Everyone in the area immediately stopped filling the plates and goblets. Anyone who had already done so pushed their food away. It had taken others a moment to understand what the blue flash had been, but they remembered back to before Yule holiday quickly. Hermione and any upperclassmen who heard Harry immediately started casting Scorpion's Revelio spells over the food in front of them and then on the food and drink of their nearby neighbors. Ch 28. Harry was not watching the students. He was trying to watch Dumbledore and Snape at the same time. Snape looked with his usual disdain at the kerfuffle as he would any disturbance caused by Gryffindors. Dumbledore was paying close attention to the instant disruption around Harry. His hands were not visible, although Harry thought his long, loose sleeves fluttered a bit. Another pass over his food and drink gathered no reaction from his ring. He then slowly and carefully passed his ring over the food and drink of his three friends. Nothing. Surprisingly, Hermione questioned Luna. Did you see any results from the older students casting Revelios? The young B.O. nodded and spoke low and thoughtful. The ones closest to us got some results, but the results disappeared almost as rapidly as they formed. I suspect counterspells and house elves were being used to switch all the food and drink near us out for non-potioned food. She cocked her head at Harry. Harry, did you see anything? Harry shook his head slightly. No. His sleeves were too long and loose. They hid almost all movement. And let's not forget he's probably the best silent caster in the country. Harry scrubbed his hands along his face. Raising his voice slightly, he said, I reckon that the headmaster has now been able to find the time to start working on regaining his control back over me. Ere Longbottom, if I start praising his greater good and never-ending admiration for him, get me hauled off to St. Mungo's to be thoroughly checked out. Harry was a tad surprised to hear the resolve in Neville's voice as he replied. All right, Harry, we will make sure that occurs. He paused, why not just have us take you to see Madame Pomfrey? Harry's reply rippled down the table like a visible wave. I'm not entirely convinced that where I'm concerned, Dumbledore hasn't influenced her mind somehow. The weeks until the vernal equinox meeting of the Wizengamot passed in worry that the old control freak would manage to get past his defenses. There had been 2 more attempts at potioning his food and drink. With no more incidents of petrification and odd writings on the walls, the Aurors were withdrawn from Hogwarts and the escorting of younger years in groups was discontinued. Everybody cheered at that announcement. Now that Harry and Hermione were not traveling in a large group, there had been 2 tries at spells that caused his ring to flare a shield around him, and he had felt that something had hit that shield. Hermione also told him her necklaces had done the same thing in a couple of shadowy hallways when he had not been with her. Hermione was looking more and more smug as time passed. Susan, Daphne and Tracy had developed that same anticipatory air whenever they were studying with each other. Harry continued his tutoring in Dada, and according to Hermione the second years were at level or beyond, and the first years were almost at end-of-year level. She also said the room was being used by 6th years tutoring 5th year AL students. The latter were incensed that, useless waste of breathable air, still was not teaching anything that would help them pass their examinations. Lupin contacted Harry through official Gringotts mail. Due to Dumbledore's restrictions, regular AL mail had not arriving at the castle for weeks. Sirius had piggybacked a letter of his own into the official Gringotts envelope and told Harry his mandatory stay in St. Mungo's was almost over. Apparently once Solicitor Tonks had entered the fray, the hospital staff had become cooperative. Or at least non-obstructive. Senior Account Manager Tongweripper's letter told him Harry's requested jewelry boxes were ready. Harry's paranoia about the old man trying not to let him leave the castle was such he had waited until the last day to sign up for the express taking those to London for the week for the short 6 days of spring equinox weekend. Since he had no urge to see the Dursleys, he had not paid attention to the short holiday in March for the other 4 years. He had found out by talking and listening that students left the castle for many reasons. Some just wanted out of the school for a week. Others were going home to participate in old family or even pagan rituals tied in with the equinox. Most Owl and Newt students were not leaving due to studying for their upcoming tests. Several 6th year heirs were leaving to be at the Wizengamot meeting to be introduced as heirs to house seats at this particular meeting as tradition demanded. Hearing Susan describe it as the male equivalent of a debutante's coming out ball had given Hermione the giggles for hours. Hermione had planned to stay at the library, come and go room, castle. She was almost daydreaming about all the hours and hours she could spend in the library reading and studying with no interruptions. She started wavering when Harry whispered, "Potter Manor with your mother," huskily in her ear. "And 2 of those days will be the weekend, so your parents don't have to go too." The words and the feeling of his warm breath on her ear, and admittedly the words, gave her a body shiver, a racing heart, and short-circuited her brain for a minute. She did not dare look at him for a minute. If he was wearing that damned lopsided smirk because he knew he had gotten to her, she was going to thump him one. He leaned in again. "Besides, I need help with some jewelry I acquired recently." This time she was ready and kept her reaction to a quiet gasp of surprise. Harry was going to entrust her with knowledge of one of the biggest secrets he had. Raced through her mind. Well, maybe if she wasn't in the castle where Dumbledore could get to her, he would. She reflected that while she was guessing the jewelry referred to the diadem, the feeling that she had received from the unshielded diadem felt a lot like the maliciousness of the diary. As though they were a pair, but the diadem was a bit weaker. Both had seemed to invade her mind, overwhelming her with feelings and visions of inadequacy. Both of the objects had reveled in making her feel that she was a failure, a little buzzing insect to be swatted and crushed with no effort. And that was on top of their foulness, their sliminess of the tendrils that slid along the contours and passageways of her brain. She really could not think of a better description. Logic told her science had shown the human brain had no pain or touch receptors. Science was wrong. The invasion of her brain felt like that. Except when she was touching Harry that time down in his basement. And he had unthinkingly told her that he knew what those things were and he knew how to kill them. How do you kill something not alive? She thought. Also, maybe she could now grill Harry about all the stuff that she had been neglecting the last few weeks. They had become so busy with school after the petrification lockdown had been lifted that she felt she had lost her focus. What had happened in the room had shaken her. She needed to find out from Harry that occlumency would mitigate the thing's invasion of her mind. What were they going to do about a freaking basilisk underneath the castle? She just wanted to contact Susan's aunt and have the magical police take care of it. But, both her research and Harry had told her out of any group that went to kill a large basilisk, usually 2/3 or more of the group were killed during the attack. But what of the roosters? And most importantly, what was Harry planning to do to the things? He now had a pair of those things. He had told her he just could not walk into Gringotts with them and hide them in his deep vault. How he knew that was a curiosity itch that was driving her mad. Anyway, she had decided to be on the Hogwarts Express on Thursday. She would have 6 days to get some answers. Especially the big one. How and why was he 2 years older, and back here? The end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.